Welcome, everyone, to our deep dive on hiring your first employee. My name is Deborah Gallant, and I'm the Senior Program Manager at Entrepreneurs Forever. I'll let Sarah Franks give you her whole bio coming up, but she's going to be our guest. She's an HR professional. And these deep dives that I put on every month are meant to give you the literal deeper information than you're going to find out in one of our regular peer group meetings. There's just technical stuff you need to know as you run a small business. This is one of the pain points that we hear about a lot. Today's agenda, we're going to do our introductions, tell you who Entrepreneurs Forever is. I've started telling you about our upcoming programs before I go into today's program, because otherwise I never come back to it and remember to do that. We're going to have our guest presenter do a presentation. And as you all know, it's very interactive. So if you have questions, you can ask them as they go. If they're clarifying questions about what's being presented, if you want to ask about your specific situation or talk about a horror story you've heard or something else that you would prefer not to be recorded, then wait till the end of the presentation and we'll have the open Q&A at the end. So again, today's topic, hiring your first employee. When I worked at E4All, which is the sister organization to Entrepreneurs Forever, this was one of the things that early stage businesses always were struggling with, because so often the business got built on your own shoulders, whatever it is that you love and you were passionate about. But getting bigger than just you felt daunting on a whole bunch of levels. But what Sarah's going to mostly be focusing on are some of the literal practicalities, things like payroll and taxes and reporting to the government and employee handbooks and stuff that go, oh, that seems way too complicated. I'm just going to keep doing it myself. So she's my expert coming from Organization Inc., and I hope she'll tell a little more about herself in just a moment. I just want to make sure everyone knows who our organization is. We're Entrepreneurs Forever. Our mission is to empower all small business owners to grow thriving businesses that sustain their families and support their communities. And I believe, I know Casey and Sandra are members. I'm not sure about Tiffany or the people who are watching the recording, but we're welcome. You're all welcome here. If you know anyone who you think should learn more about our program, or you yourself want to, we have a weekly business boost and you can sign yourself up for that online. This is when I tell you about what we're doing next. And I think it's really important right now that you know, today we're talking about hiring your first employee, but next month I have another HR professional coming, Myra Quick, to talk about employee handbooks. Because one of the things you're going to hear about today, Sarah's going to say, when you're hiring, you need to have a handbook. And she absolutely will not have time to go into what goes into a handbook. That's why I'm bringing Myra back. So that'll be next month, but you can obviously ask high-level questions of Sarah today. And as you're growing your business, you may also have encountered the words or the letters CRM. CRM, Customer Relationship Management. That's software that can help you run the sales part of your business or more. Some of them are fully functional, I'll run your whole business for you systems. And Doogie Levine, who's one of our facilitators, is going to join me on Friday, July 12th, to look at all the aspects of what's involved. How do you decide if you need a CRM? How do you pick a CRM? Why one over another? We're actually going to log in and look at a few, including HubSpot, which we're using at Entrepreneurs Forever with, I would say, mixed success, because implementing it is no joke, people. So CRMs will be on Friday the 12th. This is my legal disclaimer. This presentation does not take the place of professional advice from your own paid advisors. And I'll also tell you that Sarah, our presenter, is coming to us through a company that I've worked with called Organization Inc. And she's like, I'm so nervous. What if they ask a hard question? I told her it's okay not to know everything, but she knows an awful lot. And I can promise you she knows more than I do. So she put this presentation together. I'm going to let her take it in a moment. But I thought I might start, especially because we're not a huge group. What are your concerns and obstacles? What made you take this time out of your life and your workday to come? What are your things that you think about when you worry about it? We'll just help Sarah and I talk about it when we do it. You can unmute, you can put it in the chat, whatever you like.
I'll start. Can you hear me?
Sure, Sandra, go ahead.
Hi, yeah. I start the things that keep me up at night is number one, at what level do I have to start paying an employee, benefits? And number two is how do I ensure that the employee is actually doing, can actually do the job? How do I make sure that I do a good hire? And number three is, what are my options if it's not, a good hire? So are there any legalities around that?
Those are great questions. So making sure the person is up to doing it. And then what if they don't? And I would also say one of the things that maybe is implied in that is we all work with remote workers all the time, right? Are they actually walking their dog, or are they actually working? And how can you monitor them? You want to have a level of trust, but that's a great question. Anybody else have anything that they came thinking, gee, this is what's bothering me about the hiring question?
I put
Go ahead, Tiffany.
Yeah, so far my husband and I are, working, like it was me and now he's helping, and I'm kind of wondering at what point I can see that we're going to be expanding, and I'm wondering at what point I hire either another family member or other people.
Like, is there a signal somewhere in your business that tells you when it's time?
Yeah, and is it easier logistically or legally to just hire a family member versus hire somebody else?
Great question. Anyone else? All right, there's still a lot to cover. So I'm going to do one thing now. I just sent you all in the chat the handout that goes with it. It's not hugely informative in and of itself. It's more of a checklist to follow along with Sarah as she goes. And it has some resources at the end that I think you will all find helpful. So Sarah, I'm going to shut up now and you can introduce yourself and then talk about where to get started.
All right. So my name is Sarah Franks. I've been working in HR for about 12 years now, and I've been with Organization Inc. Since the end of 2021. I'm originally from Texas, hence the accent. And I'm happy to be in New England, where the healthcare is better and the people are more direct. So I'm going to talk to you guys a little bit about HR and onboarding. There's a lot to consider, when you want to hire someone. And the first thing that you want to move into is, you got to start at the top, right? You got to make sure your business is registered and established. And so this is a small checkpoint kind of going into that. You're going to register your business with the state that you will be, providing services in. Then you want to consider the type of employees and how many you need. So seasonal, part-time, full-time. And then you're going to set up your tax accounts. Since I'm in Massachusetts, so I'm going to use Mass as an example, but, Mass Tax Connect, you're going to register there. Once you run your first payroll, you're going to, then
you're going way too fast. We're just giving you an overview of what you're going to hear more of.
Yeah, this is my breakdown. So, and then you're going to apply for all of those things. Those are just the specific spots. You're going to, when you target your recruiting, there's, multiple platforms that you can use to recruit, and we can go over those. Onboarding in itself, it's always good to have a checklist, and we can go over that as well. Basic employment laws, whether you are HR or not, it's always good as a business owner, or even a manager, to have an idea of what those basic employment laws are, so you can stay compliant and you never cross the lines between, compliance and discrimination. And then, of course, managing performance. It's always good to give feedback to people that work for you, so you know where they stand and if they're a good cultural fit. And we'll get further into that as we go.
And I think that answers Sandra's question about how you get rid of them too, because if you have a system to manage them, hopefully then you can document if they don't work. Jane also asked another question about the idea of using apprentices. So maybe we'll either get to that in the Q&A or that you can talk about that in context.
Okay, let's see. All right, so registering your business. Do any of you guys have a business that you're not currently registered, or all of you registered with the state where you work?
Looks like good nod. Yeah.
Okay. So that's good. So you know a little bit about that process. You had to apply for an EIN, an FEIN, it's literally the same thing. And you're required to set that up in the state in which you're providing services and products, right? The next thing you want to do is that state registration. You're going to register with the Secretary of State, and you know, you want to make sure that wherever you register, the services are being delivered to in that particular state. So we can go a little further into the employees living and, you know, even working remote. Here at Oregon, we have several people that are outside of Massachusetts that work remotely, but the clients they provide services for are in Massachusetts. So there's a lot of gray area and a couple loopholes there that we can discuss as well as we go.
So Sarah, for instance, the organization that employs me, Entrepreneurs Forever, is based in Pennsylvania, but I live in New York and I provide services to people really everywhere. So do they have a reporting requirement for me for New York because that's where I reside?
Yes. So you are so this is where it gets a little complicated, or I guess confusing. You are required to report your tax withholding as a New York employee. However, it's up to you as that employee to report those taxes and pay them. So you don't, it depends on what your business does and the amount of business that is done outside of that home state, to whether or not the business itself is responsible to report and file. So like, for example, we have, you know, employees in Connecticut, and they are a, you know, a state taxed state. And so, those employees provide services in mass though. And so they're required to report that withholding in their income, you know, like when they do their income tax.
So I
Okay.
have a question for you. I reside in Philadelphia. And Philadelphia city, believe it or not, we have our state taxes, but we also
Mhm.
have a city tax, and it's called a
Yeah.
business, it's called a privilege, a working privilege tax. And so it's different for a person that lives in the city, but
Yeah.
even if a person lives outside of the city and Pennsylvania, they still pay a portion of the city tax. So I just pay more because I'm supposed to be getting benefits from the city. I don't know what they are, but
So,
I
so
pay.
if Sandra has a business headquartered in Philadelphia, but her employee does not live in Philadelphia, but let's say for easy sake, there's in Pennsylvania, does she not pay Philadelphia taxes for them? Or because she's employed by a Philadelphia company, she would have to?
I believe that she would have to. I would have to verify that directly with your state site, but I do know that you know, since Philly has their own local tax,
Mhm.
non-residents and residents have different rates.
Right.
And so I know that they are required to report. I can definitely tell you they'd be at different rates. Um, I don't know an incredible amount about the state of Pennsylvania, but it's definitely something I could look into for you. Go back to my page where I left off. Let's see. So, your first employee, you get to that point and you're like, you know, I need some help. I want to hire someone. The first thing you need to decide, is this person going to be a W-2 employee or are they going to be a 1099? And there's a lot of criteria that separates what's allowed, you know, for a 1099 and a W-2 employee. If they're casual or seasonal, they can be a 1099 because you know that they're probably working elsewhere. They're not making 100%, or I think it's like 75% or more of their income directly from you. So they would be considered a 1099. But you do need to remember there are little things behind that, regarding their scheduling, you know, they would have to supply certain things for themselves, and it just depends on the nature of what they're doing for you. If they ever get to that point where they're consistently part-time, they would need to become a W-2 employee. Let's see. So contractors, seasonal, event workers, stuff like that. And you want to look into the criteria for what makes a 1099 employee versus a W-2 employee. They can schedule their own stuff and they have to be responsible for themselves. So you're not required to provide them benefits, but you also can't micromanage their schedule. So there's a little bit of a line there that you have to walk with 1099 employees or staff members.
I know that you can get in trouble with the IRS pretty easily if you misclassify people. If and the reason we put this wording in the box is it's not a way to get away without paying people the full value of what they're worth and their benefits. If what they do is really work for you full time, you have to pay them and treat them as a full-time worker. Now, there's no requirement to give them benefits. I think you have to be over a certain size, and it's a state requirement in terms of giving people benefits. Is that right?
Yeah, and each state is different.
What is it in Massachusetts? Do you know?
So 1 to 10, anything over 1 employee, I think you have to provide benefits for.
Oh, so even on your first employee who is not
unless you're
you.
the owner and you're the only employee. So like technically that would be the second one, I think. Yeah. And there's no criteria behind the type of benefit. You don't, ultimately that's up to the company, but for healthcare purposes, and I believe it's health and dental, those two things. Vision is optional, life insurance is optional, stuff like that. Those would be considered, perks or bonus benefits that you can advertise, like if you're trying to hire.
But things like vacation days or a sick time policy, those are the kinds of things that kick in with an employee that wouldn't be relevant for a 1099, right?
Yeah, they wouldn't be eligible for it. They wouldn't be eligible for bonuses or anything like that. I will say with sick time, and I think this will be later down the line, but just for you guys to know, sick time under 10 employees and under, you're not required to pay it, but you can. You still accrue it and they can use it, but you're not required to pay it.
And do things like family medical leave, like if you hire somebody and they get pregnant, do you have to hold their job for them if you're a certain small size company?
So if they go on, FMLA or they go on PFML, you are required to hold a position, but if your business needs state that you have to have someone fill that, then you're gonna have to find something else for them upon their return.
And that's even if you're just one person. A family medical leave would apply just to that first employee who isn't you.
Yeah, but there's criteria behind that to qualify for even being paid to leave. You have to be there for a set amount of time. You have to have worked a set amount of hours. And it's not like unemployment where they look at the previous 2 years. For PFML, they essentially look at, the last 4 quarters that you worked for that company. And so I know in Philadelphia, they don't offer PFML at all.
Okay. Are we ready to move to the next slide?
Yeah. So you've hired your employee. Well, before you've technically hired them, I guess we're going to set up payroll. So there's a website called EFTPS, and I believe that it's electronic funds transfer something PS. I can't remember the last two, sorry. But you're going to go to that, and essentially what that does is you direct your 1099ers there, and if they can apply for what's called it's like an I-10 number. So instead of using their social, if they're a business, they can apply for that, and they pay directly through the IRS at, using the EFTPS site. And so this allows them to pay any kind of, income tax withholding, FICA, or, FUTA taxes.
That's for the people you've hired as 1099s.
No, they can use it, but ultimately you have to enroll with EFTPS for W-2 or 1099 employees.
All right, so this is
If you're a
on you.
1099, you can go directly to it
But
and pay your.
if you're the employer, right, we the small business owner, you need to go and take care of all of this stuff for your employees.
Yes, employees only. 1099ers are responsible for setting this up for themselves. Yeah.
Okay.
So are you suggesting then that as a business owner, that one of the things that we should consider doing is go ahead and register for this EFTPS, or wait until we get a 1099 person?
So, trying to think of how to answer that. You should already be enrolled with them because they are connected to the IRS. So one, say like, I'm just going to use an example. If you're using QuickBooks Online and you're processing payroll through that, every time you process payroll, it sets aside those withholding amounts, right? Not only your contribution as the employer, but the employee's, deduction. And so that kind of goes into, like, I guess you could say, this pot once it's filed, and that's what these quarterly filings are, the 941 and the 940. The 941 is essentially the wages and everything that's paid along with the taxes. And the 940 is specifically the unemployment contributions that are made, either withheld from the employee and contributed from the employer. And so they kind of go into this pot, and they just kind of sit there until they're needed.
Okay, Sarah, let me see if I can clarify one thing that's on my mind. Let's say I'm a one-person business and I haven't ever put myself on payroll. I just take the money out at the end of the year and just call it a wash. If I do that, it means I haven't been paying into Medicare and Social Security. So even if I just put myself on payroll, so I'm paying in my QuickBooks Online or whoever I use to run payroll for me, means that I'm keeping up with my payments. So at the end, when I retire, all of that stuff has been paid into for all of those years. And even if you don't hire an employee, which is the subject of this webinar, these are good things for you to do if your business isn't paying you on payroll.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, you should just enroll for it regardless, whether or not you have an employee ready to process payroll on or not. It'll help you just to have it. Nothing bad will come out of it for having one. It's just access so you can pay directly. But I will say this, you don't typically need it when you're using a service like QuickBooks Online and you're set up for automatic filing and payments. They do it for you. But
However,
they're the ones that
my experience is many of our business owners just take money at the end of the year and didn't run it through payroll at all. And I will tell you, as somebody who's nearing their retirement age, they take your 35 best years of income and you had to have paid in all of those years to collect the maximum. So don't think I'm young and it doesn't matter, I can skip a couple of years. Don't skip the couple of years. Do this.
No. It affects you. It definitely affects your bottom line on what you'll be eligible for Social Security, stuff like that. Like every year, I think you receive a letter, or at least I know, I think every year you get a letter from the Social Security Department. It breaks down all of your earnings in your lifetime and the percentage that you're eligible for if you were to retire at this age or this age or this age. So EFTPS only required once you have payroll. Yeah, so if you're not paying anyone, you're not going to need that because you're not going to have any withholding taxes to report or file or pay. But I highly recommend that once you do, if you're not using a service that automates it for you, you definitely have to have EFTPS. And it's a federal platform. It's not just per state, although you can specify when you're doing it. But for state taxes, you typically go through Mass Tax Connect or Mass Unemployment.
Or you're whatever state you're in. Didn't someone else have a question about this?
Let me see. I feel like I missed somebody's, but I'll come back to Jane's first question. Okay. So let me see. So your state payroll taxes, in order to set that up, you're going to go to Mass DOR, Department of Revenue, and you're going to set up, your mass filing. in your wage report. So the first thing you're going to get is you're going to be assigned a withholding number from the state. And it starts with WTH and then a bunch of numbers. And then that is going to be plugged into your payroll, portal and set up like that. So it can start recording those 941 filing amounts. And then at the end of that quarter, you'll know exactly what you need to file. And you either go directly through EFTPS or you set yourself up for automatic, which I highly recommend. It's a lot easier. And whoever you use, they're responsible for it. So if there's any kind of issues, you have that to fall back on. Same thing with unemployment, the filing the wage and detail report, mass PFML if it applies to you, or PFML if it applies to you by your state. Everyone is entitled to FMLA, and that's a little different. It's family, that's a like federal level leave. PFML differs state to state. And then you have your EMAC, which is Employer Medical Assistance Contribution, and your Workforce Training Fund. The Workforce Training Fund, not everyone is going to be subject to these. And if you are, it's a very, very, very small percentage.
Now, if you use an outside payroll company, they're going to help you set all this up, right?
Absolutely. Yep. So now we're going to move into the actual rates. These are based on Massachusetts, but I know that some people are in Philadelphia and in Pennsylvania, so I ran a couple of those numbers for you too. So in Massachusetts for this year, your max taxable earnings is 15,000. So once you've hit 15,000, that percentage of what you're paying out, it just kind of caps. That's your cap. And so Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, theirs is 10,000. So it's a little less. So then you have your employee deduction. In Mass, you don't have to have one. It's you can choose to pay out more or you don't have to. Your employer rates for your COVID and workforce training fund, those are kind of rolled into one, and you're given this percentage bracket between 0.293 to 4.469. It just depends on 100% what your rate is, depends on the nature of your business. If you are, let's say you're in a restaurant and you've got burners and stuff like that, you're going to be a little bit of a higher rate because there's a little bit of a risk involved. Construction, higher rate. If you are simply admin and you're hiding in your bat cave like I do every day, working remote, and the worst you have to worry about is paper cut or your batteries in your mouse dying and you throw it against the wall, that escalated quickly, but typically your rate's going to be really low. Let's see. And then you've got your COVID-19 assessment rate. So that's a new thing, obviously. That started in 2021, I think. They weren't 100% sure what to do in 2020. Everybody kind of ran around with their heads cut off for a while, and here we are, more taxes. But it does help. I think it levelizes things out, and that can be taken out at a much, much higher rate, depending on the risk of how many employees you have, how many people have the potential to get COVID in one space. Let's see. And the rest of these are they're just breakdowns. They're not going to always apply to everything. Again, it's industry specific. So when you go to set up payroll, one of the things you need to determine are, am I obligated to pay benefits? And again, that differs per state. State standards are, they change based on how many employees you have and if you're required to offer benefits. And if you are, I highly suggest working with a broker. It helps. It helps if that's not something you're familiar with. They do a lot to keep you compliant and make sure that you're providing the right kind of plans to your staff and working with you on that. And then you set it up with direct deposit. So it comes out automatically each check or each payroll cycle. Same thing for garnishments. It is listed under benefits, but it's the opposite of a benefit. And typically a garnishment is going to be a child support order. I've seen one before. IRS will sometimes send the employer, a letter saying, hey, this person needs to pay this much each check or whatever, similar to a child support order. But those are the only two garnishments I've ever seen in my entire career thus far. So downside, yes, there is a monthly fee to run payroll. It's typically a monthly payment plus there's an amount per employee past a certain amount. And then, yeah, there's add-on fees to process W-2s and send them out and to file them, along with any kind of paycheck cutting and stuff like that. It just depends on who you go
Does
with.
a big company like Paychex or ADP really want the business of little solo entrepreneurs or people with 2 or 3 employees?
Oh yeah, it's actually a cheaper option for people that are very small in numbers at the moment. So for example, I have one client, I'll just say that they are a construction company and mostly painting. They have 5 employees, and we ran the difference between using what's a platform called Sure Payroll, which is ultimately Paychex. The amount that they pay per month on that versus QBO payroll there's a huge difference. So we're saving them money, and it's one way to kind of keep your costs low. It's really, really beneficial for smaller.
Sarah, can I ask you a question? So like Sandra and I, we're both in Pennsylvania, and we're thinking about getting our first employees, right? So say I start out with a part-time worker, they're maybe coming 10 hours a week and they're at minimum wage. At what point do they move over from a casual or seasonal 1099 to a W-2?
So I would say that how many hours or like how many months out of the year do they work right now?
Let's say, I don't have one yet, but let's say they would work 4 months out of the year.
So they'll definitely stay a 1099er. If they're working like every month and they're working, 20 and under hours on a weekly basis, or even like 50 to 60 on a monthly basis consecutively, that's when I would really start to consider pulling them in as a W-2 part-time employee. And depending on your state, you're not required to offer benefits or anything like that to part-time employees.
You said 50 to 60 hours a week. Wait, what did you say? 50 to 60 a month?
A month, yeah.
Okay,
And that's not like set in stone. It's just an example. But basically, you want to look for that consecutive pattern. If they're working for you every single month and not just, during the summer months in a restaurant or something like that, then yeah, that's going to start to really push them and nudge them over into that W-2 status.
Okay. Or if you had a couple cuts, so I'm like a farm with products, so it's really pretty seasonal, but I guess that would also be like a cumulative thing. Like if I had like 3 part-time employees, but they're working 60 hours, right? Then I'd need the W-2 also. Or
it just depends. Like if they're only working 4 months out of the year, then they're considered seasonal. But if they start working like, part-time hours every single month consecutively, then yeah, they're going to be a W-2 employee.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Can I ask you questions? People talk about these virtual assistants, and a lot of them are overseas. Are we responsible for reporting, having them here in the States, or are they considered employees? Like, what are they considered on our business side?
So are you talking about hiring somebody that lives in another country?
Yeah, a virtual assistant. They have these programs where you can hire a virtual assistant. And
so I feel like if you're hiring them through like a company that provides that, then they're responsible for that person.
okay.
Does that make
Usually
sense?
they're independent people who
Yeah, there are some.
contract themselves out to basically be like your virtual secretary or
I've
answer
seen
calls.
both.
Yeah.
Right.
If they are an individual that's like contracting themselves out, that's a little different. But you're not, so depending on the country, and that takes you into a completely different like global scale. But if they're working, if they've been like assigned to you and they're working for another company, then that company that they work for is responsible for them. If that makes sense.
Jane, I think your point was some of them do their own thing, but I believe those individuals, because they work for 5 or 6 different employers, are 1099 by definition, or they form their own company and their company invoices you in the same way that those Philippine ones do. And that I have a client who uses somebody regularly, and he just has, it's a business expense. He pays the company in the Philippines for 15 hours of that woman a week or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions about payroll companies? Okay, we're gonna move on. Great questions, ladies.
I have great recommendations if anybody needs some. All right, so insurance. The moment you have one person, you need to have workers' comp insurance, no matter what they do. W-2 employee, just to clarify. But you always want to be able to cover yourself for those 1099 employees, because they may not be. They may not be covered. You know, they may not have
So wait a
any
second, I want to
insurance.
clarify that. Even if it's just me, I should have workers' comp.
Depends on what you're doing. But yeah, typically you should have insurance for your company, because workers' comp ties into, you know, your business insurance. But yeah, you would be covered. So like Carol Ann, she owns Org Inc. She's covered.
We did a program on insurance, and I can send you guys the links to watch that and learn about the different kinds of business insurance. I'm pretty sure we covered this, but this is in relation to paying workers' comp for somebody you're bringing on as an employee, or yourself if you're now starting to payroll yourself instead of just taking money out of your business at the end.
So, and one thing I would also recommend is, you know, use an insurance broker. You can find them, and they're like a one-stop shop for healthcare benefits as well as, you know, workers' comp. You can also go to your state website, to the workers' comp section, wherever that is located, and there's a lot of information there as well. Certain employees will always have different workers' comp rates depending on the job that they do. And, you know, you just, so there's a classification behind it. The more hands-on sales, driving out in the field kind of jobs that you have, those are going to be a little bit higher rated. But again, it just depends. Let's see, quote from insurance. Yep. Did you say that you were like actively working? I'm not sure what you do. I don't see you in here. But that's a lot.
Hi. Yeah. Whoops, sorry.
Very
Yeah,
good.
sorry, I'm working behind the scenes here. Yeah, it was a lot and I was confused. It was a craft fair that I was a part of that wanted us to all have workers' comp in order to participate in the craft fair. And I got a quote for it because I already have insurance for my studio itself. But it doesn't include workers' comp because it's just me. I'm the only employee, but I got a quote to see what it would be for this craft fair, and they said $1,000 for the year. And I had to do it as a whole yearly thing, not just like for the day or whatever for the craft fair. So I had talked to the craft fair to be like, I can't do this fair if this is what you're requiring. And they understood and it was fine. But that made me really nervous about workers' comp for the future.
So this is a good example of getting a broker. I'm telling you, they will go to bat for you and they will find the rates that make sense for what you do and how many people you have. A lot of the times, if you go in and you just run a quote, like even on automotive, sometimes you're going to get astronomical rates unless you have someone go to bat for you, you know? Yeah, and it's weird too. The more people you have, weirdly, the less it is, depending again on what you do.
Okay. Yeah. I'm curious, do you like what's the best way to find an insurance broker?
I mean, I have a recommendation I can give, but I'm a little biased because they're ours and they're fantastic. So, but yeah, I can definitely include that.
Sarah will give everybody.
Tell us.
They're called Phillips Insurance Agency. and they are located in the Berkshires, I believe.
Sarah will give you her email address at the end and she'll get you that resource. I want to make sure
Yeah.
we have a chance to get through the whole presentation. Why is OSHA a big deal if we're working virtually? Isn't it everybody's problem to take care of themselves?
No, not at all. As a company, you need to make sure that your employees have the resources to understand what defines safety in the positions that they're in for you. So, for example, me, yes, I work in an office. The worst thing I face is a paper cut most of the time, but sometimes it can get crazy, but you just want to know, um, proper training and guidelines. Ergonomics is another thing that people really don't think about regarding safety. If you sit like hunched over, you're going to feel it. If your keyboard and your mouse are causing you pain, those are safety issues. They're little, but they matter. And so having a list of, you know, what looks like a safe work environment for your employees is really important. And those are things, ironically enough, that can be found on labor law posters. Most people don't realize that either.
Actually, what's funny about this job description slide is that I almost think this should have come first because all the logistics of this, like, who cares about running payroll if you don't know who you're going to hire to do what job? So if you haven't sort of shaped, because you guys are here because you know that to get bigger, you need to be able to hire. But until you think through, how can I delegate work? How can I share the work? How can I trust that it's going to be done to my standards? So this is a really important slide. And this is why Sarah put this slide in here. And as I said, I could have argued for putting it first because until you figure out what you want to hire to help you with, the rest of it kind of doesn't matter. But Sarah, now talk about what goes into a job description.
With Deborah first, I totally agree because now that I'm looking at this, my initial question was, who do I hire, how, and when do I know that they're not working? And this would help me kind of map that out.
Yeah.
And we'll be
So this is
sending
just,
you the full deck, so you'll have all of this written out too.
yeah, and I can also send out samples of, job descriptions and stuff like that. There's a lot of resources listed on the very last slide that help out a lot. So the one thing I want to stress before I go into this is when you do present your employee with this this job description, they need to sign it. They need to acknowledge it that you reviewed it with them because this keeps you it keeps you from being liable from somebody coming back and saying, well, I didn't have to do this. This wasn't in my job description. Just saying. And the last thing you want to put, and it's not in here, and I probably should have put like a FYI, but the very last thing I always put is other duties as needed. That covers, a little bit of variety for the outside scope of things. So if you have somebody that's very, very detail oriented and they're like, that's not listed, it kind of is in that gray area of as needed. So loopholes. So you want to start with
this is when you have the person that you wanted to hire and
Yeah.
you're ready to have them sign it. But this is a project you really need to do for yourself. Sandra needs to do it. Jay needs to do it before they need to handle all of the logistic stuff, because until you figure out how your work's going to get done by who, right?
Yeah. So this is going to help you get an idea of the kind of person you want. So when you sit down, you come up with the title that is appropriate for the role. You're going to come up with a job classification, and the job classification is, part-time, full-time, non-exempt, exempt, that kind of thing. Who is this person going to report to? Are they going to be a supervisor, or are they going to be supervised, and by who? You want to have a position summary. So a base like a base layer of all of the tasks that they will be responsible for, along with those core responsibilities. And that core responsibility can just be like literally a list of all the things that they're going to need to do. Educational and experience requirements. Think long and hard about this before you put it into effect. Because if you have, an executive job and there, things that come into this like confidentiality and, higher level functions, you want to make sure that this person has the experience and or education to back those skills up. as what you expect, you know. And then we kind of go into skill requirements. How many years of experience do you want them to have? Do you want them to know Microsoft Office? Do you want them to be computer savvy? And if so, to what extent? Are you willing to train? Are you willing to work with people, you know, on new software, stuff like that? Then you always want to have a, you know, a just brief description about the work environment that this role will be in. If it's remote, you always want to say, you know, mine basically say something like, you know, can lift up to 15 pounds, will be seated for, you know, yes, Jane.
I, going back to some of the skill requirements, I have a question, and this may be a little off track. I apologize, but do you have
Oh, go
any
for it.
suggestions? I'm asking for my own very specialized little question. I'm a seamstress. I need to hire somebody else to sew with me, but given the local landscape and the high demand, very low supply, I am most likely going to have to train someone.
Probably.
How do you navigate this when you can't necessarily just advertise a position and have the skills
So
there?
Jane,
They're not going to walk in.
Jane, I think your problem is meaty, but I want to put a hold on it if I can, because
Okay,
what we try to do in these deep dives is let the presenter get through the material. We then
great,
turn the recording off and do nothing but problem solve. And I bet some of these other
fantastic.
people, including Lindsay,
Thank you.
who's a craftsperson, may have some thoughts on how you train people.
And no worries, Jane. I'm already thinking about it for you. So I'll have something for you by the end of this. Okay, so then, you know, you always want to describe the work environment, whether they're going to be remote or at a desk, if they have to lift up to so much, along with the physical environment. How noisy is it? Are you in a warehouse? Are you in a restaurant in the back where everybody's yelling at each other, you know, like, hey, get this out to table 15, whatever. So you want to include those little details, right? You also want to include a statement EEOC, which basically states that we are an accommodating employer. We do not discriminate against, you know, all of the things, and that we make accommodations. And you want to cover those things. And I can send you, you know, after this, I can give you some specific wording that is just universal for everyone that kind of covers you in that transparency. And then the very end of it, you have an acknowledgement statement basically saying, hey, you know, we reviewed this. I understand what my responsibilities are in this role. And then they sign it. The end. I'm just kidding. Next slide.
Do you want to just talk about the requirement to post the salary?
Yeah, so labor law posters, the moment you have an employee, not yourself, but one additional employee, you need to post a labor law poster. And now
No,
things are
this is about the transparency on here about the salary rate on the job postings.
Oh, okay, right, sorry. So let me see. If you have 25 or more employees, you have to post like minimum wage and salary transparency. You have to actually, what's it called? It's like I might have to come back to that one. There's a site that you essentially you report it, and then it becomes transparent. I believe that this is for corporations, and then that have 25 or more. Let's see. So recruiting's always fun. Yeah. So the first rule of thumb for recruiting, you never post a full job description. You don't want to give away, I guess, trade secrets essentially. So you always want to have a good summary and a good breakdown of just the task. You want to be able to communicate who you are as a company, and basically sell yourself. You know, what are your morals, your values as a company? My opinion is to keep it non-political and you know, as unbiased as you can. It's just simply letting someone know who you are, along with what you actually do. You want to highlight multiple responsibilities and the requirements for that role. And you're going to post it with compensation, because you don't have to, but you're not going to get a lot of, you know, people that are reaching out to you about it. They're not going to be interested if they don't see like, hey, I would work for this. Okay. You know, and you want to always respond to all applicants. even if you have no intentions of hiring them or even interviewing them, you just want to acknowledge that they applied and thank them for the interest in your company. It's just common courtesy. And these are, it's a list of stuff that you can use. So your state and local unemployment office, Indeed, you can post for free, but if you want to reach people out in the Berkshires, you're probably going to have to pay for it because that is a really difficult area to hire from, just geographically, and it's just, it's tough. Social media, typically that's free unless you sponsor it, and it can reach a wide variety of people depending on the platform you use.
I'm just going to put in a word for things like the Immigrant Center and the Veterans Outreach. Jane, those are places that you may actually find a non-English speaking person with those needle skills you're looking for. I'll just throw it out there.
Yeah, that's true. So when you interview, I have 2 phases that I typically use. The first one is that phone screen where you have the application come through. Let's say you're using Indeed, right? You have the application come through and you go through and you're like, okay, I'm going to call this person and see what they're about. This is really important. It's that first, that first time, that first communication to give you a little bit of insight on if this person, could essentially be somebody you hire. So you always want to have a couple questions lined up. Yeah, the housekeeping, get it out of the way, you can never ask someone, and I'm going to go into that after the fact, but can't really ask anyone, what do you make now? But you can say, what are your salary expectations? Um, what hours are you available? Do you have transportation? If the job requires traveling for specific things, sales, stuff like that. And then you can talk about those basic qualifications. And then you move into that in-person or virtual interview. You want to have their resume or their application with their references on hand. And I strongly recommend you call those references. Some of them will be unbiased and they will give you a fair, I guess, outlook on that person, on the candidate. And then you want to have your standard questions. Those questions you want to base on what the task is and like what the job role entails. So if they're going to be in sales, you want to know, like, what would you do in this scenario? Or how do you handle conflict? How do you communicate? Those are really, really important questions to ask. And then of course you do want to sell your company and let them know that there's room for you to grow. But you also, meanwhile, want to sit back and you want to watch body language. You want to listen to how they talk and how they reference people and things that will affect your business. And that's that moment where you determine, is this person a good fit culturally for what we stand for and what we want to do?
Can I add 2 things to this slide? Because I just can't shut up. Sorry, Sarah. One is sometimes it's a good opportunity, even if you're a one-person organization, to have someone else help do a second interview or interview with you. My husband works for the state of New York, and he's constantly doing second, third, fourth interviews with people because they want to make sure there's a cultural fit, and they're letting him help listen for red flags. The other one, and I wonder, Jane, if this is something that works for you, is getting work samples. Is, send them home with something and say, I'll pay you $100, but you need to do X, Y, and Z. Sandra could have them write up a thing on consulting or, submit something in writing. There's a way to test their skills before you get in too deep. That's a great thing to do too.
Verified portfolios. That's one thing. If you are in an industry where you are providing a product to somebody, Jane, especially you, you want to, ask for a portfolio. Be like, do you have any samples? Do you have any pajama pants that you sewed in 10th grade? Let me see what you're doing, and just take a look at it, see what they can do, and then decide at that point, like, okay, this person needs a little bit of training, but I'm willing to do that. Or, oh my gosh, I'm going to keep looking, So the do's of interviewing: always have your list of questions, their resume, and, handy, right? You want to give them a quick company history, like how you got started, what you stand for, what we do. And then you want to try to anticipate any questions they might have for you. Check your own biases. It's really important because sometimes, what do they say? Don't don't read a book by its cover or something like that. And that's very important because you might see one thing and then that person opens their mouth and they just blow your mind with how amazing they are. So it's always really good to sit back and check your own biases. Like, and it's not always about a physical thing. It's just let this person do the talking, you know, find out who they are and what they stand for. So you're going to follow up with them too, you know, and it's always good to ask, how did you hear about us? How did you hear about, you know, who we are and what makes you want to work in this role? Clarify any gaps in their employment history. A lot of the times people, you know, it's not a big deal, but it does let you see a couple things, you know, to kind of keep an idea out if they were, I mean, you never know, incarcerated for 7 years, you kind of want to know,
You
right?
definitely want to know that.
You know, but let's
And
see,
then
what
require
was,
those references and check them. No
yep.
excuse.
So the don'ts, let's see, make sure you have a good list. Yep, stay consistent, absolutely. And you can use the same one over and over, and you can kind of gear it towards the different roles that you have. So if you've got somebody in the warehouse, you want to have a set of standard questions for them. And then if you got somebody in the office, you want to have those standard questions, right? Same thing with finance, ask task-related questions. Yeah, do not, this is a whole list of no.
I'm not
Don't
even
do
going to
it.
go here because I think I have grown-ups on the call. We're going to send you the deck. You'll be able to read all of these. You know not to do
Yeah.
those things.
Let's see, offer letters. So offer letters, you're going to have two different versions, right? You're going to have the same template and you'll be able to switch it up. One will be hourly, one will be salaried. I always start mine off with, you know, dear so-and-so, thank you. We, you know, excited to welcome you this opportunity at Organization Inc. Your role will be blank. You will be paid full-time salary at blank, and your work hours will be 40 hours Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 5. You will report to so-and-so. You know, mention the classification as well in that first part. And if it is remote, I always put something along the lines of, you know, this is a primarily remote role. However, there will be an expectation to, you know, come out for company functions or networking events as required or as needed, something like that. The start date, and then you let them know that this is an offer. It does not indicate a contract of employment because it is at will, right? Most states are. And they can email you back signed, or they can just email that acceptance. And then I personally, I list the benefits in my offer letter. I want them to know that, hey, after 90 days, you qualify for this, this, and this. After 6 months, you have a week of vacation. After 1 year, we do a performance review. You have an additional week of vacation, or however that goes.
Sarah, do you
It gets,
recommend doing background checks, paid background checks?
yeah, absolutely. Along with reference checks. I use Checker. It's CHECKR, and it's fantastic. The rates are pretty good. And you can create like your own little packages on what you want them to check for you. Yeah.
Thank you.
If you're, especially if it's anything in finance or they're driving, I would definitely do a background check. Let's see. Onboarding. So onboarding is fun. If you do not have an HRIS system or a platform like Gusto or GoCo or something like that, then you're typically going to do this manually one-on-one. And it can take a couple of hours. But you know, you want to have a schedule set for them so that day one, you know that you're going to go over your I-9, your W-4, you're going to walk down this entire list of stuff and they're going to fill out all that paperwork. That's the fun part. And they're going to give it back to you and then you're going to implement it as you go. But that next day, what do, right? Have training prepared and have it scheduled and ready so this person isn't just like floating around with no idea of what they need to do next. So having that training schedule, however long you want that to last, week, 2 weeks, whatever, is very important. Yeah, anybody have any questions about that part?
I'm gonna actually skip the employee handbook and tell you, you should all come to next month's deep dive on what goes in your employee handbook, when we will talk about nothing but that. And I
Yeah.
want to get to the last few slides about basic employment laws and then open up to questions.
So basic employment laws, the Department of Labor, whether you can look on your state site or federal site, there's a breakdown of everything that you need. I highly recommend having those labor law posters either virtually, because you can get them electronically now. They're really cool. Most of us are remote at Organization Inc. and I have like this little file VPN set up where everyone for like per state has access. They can go look at any time and see the breakdown for their state, federally and state-wise, like what the requirements are of us as the employer and what their rights are as the workers. And then of course you want to go over safety and stuff. I mean, unless you're working in an office, then you want to tell people like where the first aid kit is and the fire extinguisher, but and then you go over blue laws, which are those specific dates that the states require that you have to give somebody off, whether or not you pay them. So like Veterans Day, just to mention a couple of them. And then of course overtime laws. So managing performance, formal performance reviews. When you hire someone, it's really important to do that first 90-day assessment. It's not a true performance review. I call it a check-in. You want to make sure that they're settling and that they are, they feel like they're doing okay. Give them a little bit of feedback. Ask their other coworkers, hey, how's this person settling in? What do you notice? What can we do better? What can they do better? What can they, those are really important. And then of course I do a 6-month check-in as well, to review the 90-day to see if there's been any progress. And then we do an official annual performance review really close. I would try to keep it within the week to 2 weeks after their anniversary date. You don't want to go too far because then you start getting into that next calendar cycle. You always want to offer consistent feedback, and it's very important. Praise in public, reprimand in private. You don't want to break someone's spirit. You just want to be able to steer them back. And if it's a repetitive thing, then that's obviously a different conversation. And you want to be specific. Use examples of how well they're doing, but also the things that you feel like they could be doing a little bit better at. But offer solutions to help them get to that better point if they're not meeting expectations. And if they're not, then you transition to that corrective action. You explain what that is. That needs to be in your handbook, just throwing that out there. And then it leads up to termination.
And so you really want to create a paper trail if you're going to have to let somebody go, so that
Absolutely.
you can prove that
Every
you
conversation,
tried.
document.
All right, this is Sarah's email address. It's easy, hr@organizationinc.com. We are going to stay here, but I'm going to stop sharing and then I'm going to turn off the recording. Because I know that Jane wants to dig right in, and I think the rest of you may also have some questions. So stop recording.